Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk a little bit about people are all upset about how politics are right now and how dreadful things are. Well, they're not that bad. Now, a lot of people will sit there and scream and holler at the moon over that, but I have to tell you, just take a look at our history. Take a look at our elections over the past 200 plus years. And then you will look at the election taking place as it's working its way toward it in 2020 and say, oh, this is pretty tame. You have to remember, in 1789, George Washington became our first president. Of course, the vote was unanimous, and he was reelected unanimously. And then in 1796, we had our first election, and it was the first time parties existed. Now, here's the thing. It's kind of an interesting thing. First off, our Constitution was never written with the idea of party. Obviously, from the beginnings of our revolution, we had those that were more left-leaning and those that were more right-leaning. And these eventually kind of festered in George Washington's cabinet. In there, of course, you had Alexander Hamilton and you had Thomas Jefferson. Well, these guys hated each other, despised each other. And through this dislike grew political parties, which would become initially the Federalist and the Democratic Republican, or basically the Republicans initially. And of course, eventually a fissure broke between Washington and Jefferson. And Jefferson and Washington came to hate each other as well. And Jefferson did some nasty things to Washington. He suggested he was senile. He suggested he wasn't well. He said he called him Old Muttonhead. That was his nickname for him. He had said he had flabby arms like an old athlete. All kinds of just little digs. Washington fumed. And they never talked to each other, perhaps exchanging a letter once in the last years of Washington's life. And when Washington died, Jefferson came to Mount Vernon to pay his respects. And Martha Washington kicked him out. She said, my husband said, never let that man on my property. So Martha Washington told Jefferson what to do and where to go. Well, 1796 was an interesting year because it was going to be the first time there'd be parties. And John Adams was running, and he had been vice president. And it was kind of thought, at least by Adams, that perhaps it was something that he should go to. I mean, he was very important in the formation of the United States. I mean, he is one of the co-writers of the Declaration of Independence. He was the Atlas of American independence. He was a diplomat. He was there at the signing, at the creation of this country. He was in France, I mean, for the signing of the surrender, basically, the peace treaty with Great Britain. He was our ambassador here, there. He raised money for the revolution. He was our first ambassador to the court of St. James in England. That's an amazing thing when you think about it. He had to deal with King George III, who only 10 years earlier wanted to have John Adams' head. And so the election took place. He won by 4 votes. There was a lot of opposition, especially by what was called the Republican Party. And the lead of the Republican Party was Thomas Jefferson. And no treachery, no insult, no shenanigans, and no form of lie was considered too extreme to push against Adams. Now, Adams didn't quite know how to handle this because Adams considered himself above party. And this was a very, very bad mistake. Because you see, Adams would be eaten alive by not only his own party, but by the Republicans as well. And perhaps the person that was damaging him the most was his own vice president. And who was that? It was our friend, Thomas Jefferson, who hired an individual to write articles, anything to destroy the reputation of John Adams. This was Adams' friend. With friends like that, who needs enemies? Well, Jefferson's work did pretty good, but you know something? Adams was fighting a two-front war. Who was the other person attacking him? Alexander Hamilton, who was a Federalist and in Adams' own party. He wrote an entire pamphlet talking about the madness of John Adams. You know, I have to tell you something. We have this new musical about Alexander Hamilton. It kind of makes him seem like he was a pretty great guy. The man was dangerous. He had a friend named Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton are pretty much the same. Lowlives in many respects. But the thing is that Hamilton could be amazingly brilliant and Burr could be amazingly brilliant. But they didn't like each other. Washington hated Burr, and Jefferson hated Burr and hated Hamilton. There was a lot of festering stuff going on. Just in those early years, the hatred and the articles in the papers and the fake news. You know, we think that's a new word today. No. In those early days, they wrote whatever they wanted without penalty. Because the newspapers, you would have something like the Massachusetts Federalist and the Pennsylvania Republican. And in those papers, they were totally biased. And they would say whatever they wanted. Didn't matter. Who was going to stop them? And so Adams won, served his term, had to deal with a faux war with France. Fortunately, he saved the United States from going under. If he had listened to the insanity of Alexander Hamilton, most probably we might have lost this country. But fortunately, Adams, although emotional at times and sometimes totally irrational, was far more wise and far more measured and understand. He understood diplomacy. Alexander Hamilton didn't understand a thing about it. He wanted to go to war. He wanted to be a general. He wanted to go invade Mexico. He wanted to create a new country down below. I mean, he had all these wild dreams and wild plans, which eventually were blamed on Burr by Thomas Jefferson. They just changed the names because it sounded like a great thing to make him a scallywag and accuse him of treason, which of course he was acquitted on because it was bogus nonsense. And so 1800 comes, and it is a festering minefield of lies. Jefferson is running as a Republican. Adams is running as a Federalist. Well, the Republicans do their best to destroy Adams. They do their damnedest. They call him every name in the world. They say he wants to be a monarchist, that he wants to take away our rules of law. He wants to destroy our Constitution. They even accused him of being a hermaphrodite. I mean, you want to talk about it. This is insane. And of course, Jefferson's attack dog goes non-stop on the attacks on Adams. Hamilton goes non-stop on the attacks on Adams. And the end result is what you'd expect the end result to be. Adams is going to lose. But then something very bizarre happens. Jefferson was running, and who was running with him? Aaron Burr, who Jefferson hated. And they tied. And Jefferson expected Burr to step back and let Jefferson have it. Well, you have to understand that Burr was as loathsome as Jefferson. And that even more so, he could be just as smart, just as cunning. And so what happened is they had to be voted on by the House. It took like 36 votes before the tie could be undone. And Alexander Hamilton put his pushing power to Jefferson, who he despised, but he despised Burr just a little bit more. This was one of the really big parts of really tearing Hamilton and Burr apart. And so Jefferson wins. Adams is destroyed. I mean, he's made to look like an absolute fool, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that he had just saved the country from going under. Yes, he had done some stupid things, especially the Alien and Sedition Acts, which was dumber than doo-doo. But that was an extremely intelligent term, wasn't it? But the thing is that Jefferson wins in this ugly, rotten, terrible race in which there is nothing not said about each of the candidates. And very often, everything said was a lie. Well, it's an interesting thing that comes up from this whole thing. Jefferson's attack dog. Yeah, name was Calendar. He wanted a raise. He wanted more money. Jefferson wouldn't give it to him. And so guess what happens? Jefferson's attack dog attacks Jefferson. And if you've ever wondered how we ever found out about Sally Hemings, thank Thomas Jefferson's attack dog, who went to the press and told it all. Now, that was just a few of our elections. And now we're in the year 2020, and an election's coming up, and everyone's screaming, hollering, angry, yelling, fake news, and this, that, and everything else. Oh, brother. Everyone's acting like it's something new. It has been with this country since its inception. So, friends, as I have stated time and time again, learn your history, read your history, understand your history, because you're not going to understand your present day unless you understand where we have been historically. And if you understand where we've been historically, everything that's happening right now is not at all shocking. Have a good day.